Welcome to Hawthorn Press's recording of a discussion that took place for the launch of The Case for Homeschooling by Anna Dusseau. This was part of Stroud Book Festival, November 2020, all done remotely. And I'd like to thank Anna Dusseau, author, and contributors Philip Mott and Astrid Vijne, and all the people who came and contributed with questions.
We withdrew my daughter from school and my son from the nursery school attached, based really on a kind of the only way I can describe it is just a knee-jerk reaction. I always worked in secondary schools and I knew the problems in secondary schools. I didn't realize that really these problems all filter down to primary level. And so a few things built up. I think it's a common story with parents. And then, one thing happened and we just decided, no, we're not doing this with this school. So we withdrew our kids, and lots of parents do that. I don't know how common that is in the States actually, but in the UK, I know lots of people who move their children around to another school and they're in a new school jumper the next week. And we just said, that's not good for our kids. They need stability. We know we can homeschool. We'll give it a year. We'll find a better school alternative. Homeschooling long term just simply wasn't on the cards. And honestly, it took us maybe 2 weeks of homeschooling to just not be looking for another school anymore. We had no idea how it just completely transforms your family dynamic, the way children approach the world, the way we approach our children. It was really healing for us, a family who we've moved a lot and we don't have any family around to support. My husband's French, my family are 6-hour drive away near Cornwall, in Devon near Cornwall, and we have had lots of changes in our lives, and they've been to different nursery schools. And I wrote a blog post about how my relationship with my son in particular really suffered from nursery school. So for us, it was the experience of those first few weeks of just settling into homeschooling were transformative. I didn't know children could learn that way. And what I said to Philip, I remember, because Philip also comes from a teaching background, is that for me, it felt very important to get that message out. That was why I began my blog. Because as a teacher, to not know that this is how children can learn and that this is a really happy way for children to be is very problematic. We're interfering with education in so many ways that is simply unnecessary. I have said to everyone who reads my blog and anyone who knows me that my eldest, who's nearly 7, and my second one, who is 4, and that's young to learn to read, I have put no pressure on him for that. They both read fluently and they've taught themselves. And that's a common story in homeschooling. Not necessarily at 4, I think he's quite precocious, but teaching yourself to read is a common homeschooling story. And I felt it's so important that people know this because I had no idea, and I've worked for 10 years in education. I think probably I felt that homeschooling was too alternative for me. And what I think is the problem is that when you start homeschooling, this isn't a problem with homeschooling, but the thing is, when you start homeschooling, you see the world in a different way. And Astrid and Philip will both tell you their different experiences of that. You completely change your perspective on what you want from your life. I know people who've given all their life savings to charity or to a project or something like that, things that I would have previously thought, you're mad, the kind of capitalist consumer values that are all put on all of us and that we all kind of accept in our lives. I always thought, we work hard, I will go back to work after the baby starts at nursery and I'll start working again, and we really need to pay off this mortgage and That was where my head was at. When you start homeschooling, you have so much more time. Your focus goes from an inward focus. What are my kids' results? What do I need to get ready for school tomorrow? What do we need for homework? This, to an outward focus. You start thinking, what can we give back to the world? What are we doing with our lives right now? Is our job important, or could we be doing something more important? And it changes your focus in a way that then I think it's really easy. I think people now meeting us, not knowing us, 2 years ago, would probably think, this is quite an alternative radical family. But the thing is, we weren't. And the thing is, it's actually homeschooling that's changed that for us. It's not that we decided to bring our kids up in a particular way. It's that it creates a different culture in your family that is just much more outward looking. And I think this is a big problem too. I spoke a bit with Martin and with some other people at Hawthorn Press about this, that Someone said to me, I think that you have to remember that in the media, almost everyone is heavily invested in the school system. People who work in media, work long hours and need childcare, and most of their children are at school, and they have very little investment or reason to be presenting articles that question their own life views. And I think that that could be an underlying reason why we just overwhelmingly see journalists and being negative about home education, and therefore we create a negative dialogue around home education, because no one likes questioning what they're doing in their own life. I think we all defend our own values, don't we? We all defend what we're doing and the choices we make.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. So I was thinking that remembering really about going back to work for me, and suddenly as in with young kids, and being able to sit at a desk without someone pouring coffee all over me, and being able to finish my sentences, which was, so how do you juggle all of that, which we know as having been at home with kids, with your work?
Yeah, so when I'm in a busy phase, when I've got maybe like some articles that need writing, or a deadline with a book, I choose to manage it by getting up very early. But I think lots of people do that, so it's not uncommon. So I get up at 4 a.m. and I work from sort of 4 a.m. through to about 7 or 8 when the kids wake up. And then I'm normally tired at the end of the day, so I tend not to work, but sometimes I'll do a bit of work at the end of the day. In a way, I'm quite in a fortunate situation, because my husband works night shifts. So although I'm on my own, when we had babies and stuff when they were really little, that was quite hard doing nights on my own. But it's nice to have him around a little bit in the day with homeschooling. That's really nice. But other people work in different ways. Now, I've met lots of homeschooling families who will do anything to make it work, So I've met people who both tag team shift work jobs, like for example in hospitals. I just came back from a really lovely forest school group, educational group, to anyone questioning lockdown in the UK, an educational group where, the dad is the homeschooler. And so the mom went back to work and works in a media job, and the dad homeschools. And it's really a lifestyle decision, and it really makes you see your children differently. So I totally identify with what you're saying there, Katie. I was the same when I went back. My daughter was 10 months old. I went back to a management job as well, and it was long hours. And although it was stressful, I remember there being a part of me that felt sort of an adult vibe, for that period of time. But I think the thing people don't appreciate is that when you homeschool, and I never knew this, your children change, your relationship with your children changes. A journalist said to me a while ago that she said, I would never have homeschooled my son, and my son wouldn't have liked it. He said, I couldn't have stood being around you all that time. And the thing is, I really understand what she's saying, but when you homeschool your children, the majority of people I've met, and myself included, you back off your children massively. There are very few people I've ever met that homeschool and have the same level of discipline and authority that you have of your children when they're going to school. It's hard work getting 3 small children out the door at 8:30, 9 a.m, earlier, homework, bags, kits, let's do this, cross the road. It's a very stressful routine. And when you're together all the time, you can't live like that. You just can't. You just naturally take a step back and have a different kind of relationship, which simply means the dynamic isn't the same. You can't really compare it. It's just like comparing things that are not the same. So so I would say it's something you can only really understand if you've lived it. And what's exciting is that in the UK, I think that plenty of people have lived it during lockdown, actually.
Astrid is joining us from New York. She was originally from Seattle, and she writes a great blog about world schooling, which is travel to you and me. And but the obvious question, Astrid, is how are you coping when there's no traveling allowed?
Yeah, I've had this conversation with a lot of other families that are traveling. In some ways, this, the US is also, we're not in lockdown, but there's a lot of restrictions for us as citizens in terms of traveling to other countries. So we've really focused our travels domestically and have really slowed down on our travels as well, just in order to be a little bit more responsible about, just keeping ourselves healthy and others healthy. But so in that sense, we're not having these big international types of travel experiences, but we're still maintaining the philosophy of world schooling where we are. So for us, and for those of you that aren't familiar with what world schooling is, it's not really a separate type of homeschooling philosophy, but it's more just using the world and your travel experiences as a way to guide our kids' education. So you could still follow a certain curriculum, but then incorporate travel experiences into that curriculum, or you could be unschoolers like how we are and just use different travel experiences as like a jumping off point into diving deeper into like a local culture or a local history and things like that. So in that sense, our travel, while our travels have been different, our schooling has been essentially the same because we spent the summer in my hometown and we just ended up learning about the history of our hometown, the indigenous cultures that existed there before, the settlers came, and even just learning more about like US history because we're Americans. And so that's definitely stayed the same even with the pandemic and our travels restricted.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's good to hear. And I love the concept of unschooling rather than homeschooling. So it doesn't have to be at home. You can be out and about. So that's quite exciting. So do you find that you are learning along with your children? Are you learning new stuff?
Yes, definitely. I feel like actually I learn more than my kids do. My kids are my kids are 10 and 7 now. And so when we do our homeschooling activities, if it's not something more structured like math or grammar or writing or spelling, something like that, like if it's history or social studies or even geography, we do a variety of different resources in terms of learning. So we could read a book together, or we'll watch some videos from like educational channels on YouTube. And I do it with them. I spend, the 30 minutes or an hour of just learning and absorbing, and then we talk about it. So there's a lot more of engaging with them in terms of like, what did you learn from this video that we watched? What did that make you, or what did that make you think of? And really just using more of like a Socratic method of learning as opposed to like didactic, I am the teacher and you are the student. It's more like, let's talk about what we just saw, or let's talk about what we just experienced.
So do you see yourself more as a facilitator than a teacher?
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a education background, although I did do some pre-primary school teaching when I was, a few years ago. But I do feel like I am more of a facilitator of learning with my kids as opposed to the teacher in their life. Yeah. And the same goes for my husband too, because speaking to just the gender dynamic, we kind of share the responsibilities of learning or teaching with our kids because both of us work full time. And so we have to sort of balance that homeschooling schedule with our work schedule as well.
Gosh, well, how does that work? So I'm intrigued as to how you can both be working full time and be teaching the kids as well.
Well, it's really the kind of how Anna has Anna was talking about how her husband does a night shift and then she does in the morning. We stagger our work schedule so that I start a little bit earlier than my husband so he can do some school in the morning, and then I'll do some school in the afternoon or after work. So there's a lot of and when we're traveling, it is a little bit better if we're in another country where the work hours for our companies are, in the evening. Then we can spend the day schooling with them, and then we'll work in the evening. So it, as a traveling family, we really do have to take that time zone change or time difference into account as well in terms of learning.
Yeah, that's an added complication.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that I can imagine that the burden of homeschooling falls predominantly on women? Do you think that's true?
I do. In some cases, I do, but I think it really depends on each family. So when we started homeschooling, I wasn't working full time, and so my husband was doing mostly the working, and then I was doing mostly the homeschooling. But as our work schedules have shifted, we've really had to be mindful of shifting the homeschooling responsibilities as well. So I think it just depends on each family.
Okay, that's great. Well, I think this is a really good time to bring in the man in the room. So Philip, I think you'd be a very good example of a dad who's sort of taking the helm in the homeschooling in your family. And so you're in Indiana, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you were a teacher, and now you're an unschooling dad to 3.
That's right. And I think one thing that sets me apart a little bit is I also consider myself a reluctant learner. When I was in school, I really struggled in school. I was not engaged from about 5th grade on through graduation, and didn't go to university right after school. Actually tried it for a year and then just really continued to struggle. And then decided to get into education kind of as I discovered the joy of learning myself. I thought, oh, I can save all these kids from themselves. I can be charming, and they'll want to learn from me. And then, just hit the same wall that so many teachers hit, which feels like a lack of motivation. And since I was so familiar with that experience, I really passionately dug into the research about why students are disengaged. And so that really led to my journey to understand what's called respectful parenting, and then finally unschooling.
Well, that's very interesting that both you and Anna were professional teachers, and then so you went in with sort of idealistic views of what teaching could be, and then were disappointed. Yeah, I know quite a few teachers who've had a similar experience. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Philip, was about creative learning. So do you feel that you are getting the creative learning with your kids that you had hoped for?
That and everything, so much more. I'm really learning to kind of to piggyback off what Astrid was saying is, our roles at home have kind of shifted and gone back and forth a little bit. And I'm really learning as a man to step in and not assume that my wife is going to take care of things. If there's a diaper that needs changed, or if there's an activity that needs to be done, whoever sees the need for it, we try to just step in and do it. Instead of just assuming, that I'm going to do all the yard work and she's going to do all the housework. We really have started to kind of go back and forth with that. I guess to answer the question, I did not realize that how much my kids would actually be learning without any of my assistance. And so them, sort of thinking outside the box and um, and understanding that they could really drive so much more of their learning process was mind-blowing and very inspiring to me. And at this point, I don't see how I could possibly turn back and try to drive their education for them.
It's interesting. Do you feel that you're sort of co-creating with them what their curriculum is going to be?
Absolutely. And yeah, so we have a saying in our home, because people in like homeschool groups always ask us, well, what curriculum do you use? And we say it sort of tongue in cheek, but we are also very serious that in our home, curiosity is the curriculum. And that sometimes means that we buy books or we buy box sets of curriculum, but more often it just means that the questions guide everything. And you know, right now we have behind our home, we have a new neighborhood that's going in. So they're seeing bulldozers and trucks and all this construction process going on. And so every one of them, there's 6, 4, and 2, every one of them is kind of looking at that process unfolding, and that's what they want to learn about. So, I mean, we've even gone as far as to like looking up model numbers of bulldozers and like pretending like we're shopping for a bulldozer, even though we're definitely not. So, you know, they're learning all kinds of things through that process. And in some regards, standards wise, they're far beyond what appears might be, but then there's other things that they're missing too, which is pretty unavoidable. You can only really get to so much. There's so much knowledge in the world, and you can only get to so much of it.
And this is something I wanted to ask all three of you, is that do you think that homeschooling or unschooling is a luxury for people who can afford to do it? I mean, middle class people whose work is freelance and they can move their own schedules.
I've met too many people through the time that we've been homeschooling who come from such a wide variety of backgrounds and of incomes and of cultural backgrounds, that I could never say that is what the picture of homeschooling looks like in the UK, and I doubt that it's what it looks like in the US and in other countries. So one of the contributors to the book lived in a homeschooling sort of commune, a shared home situation between 3 families and then between 2 families, in order to make it work, because she was a single parent and she also needed to work to be able to contemplate at some point affording a place on her own. And in order to be able to do that, they shared the childcare and the homeschooling amongst a group of families. And I've met other people who have found other arrangements for homeschooling. There are people I know who are on big incomes and single incomes that are big incomes, and it's very comfortable and easy for them. There are also people I know who are living on a shared income or on a single income that is really not big at all, and for whom financial decisions are really tight. And in our family, I would be lying if I tried to present us as anything that we're not. Like, my husband has a comfortable salary, but prior to homeschooling, we were both working and both contemplating working within the near future. So even a family like ours, who you could easily stereotype as the kind of, well, you're the obvious kind of family that would homeschool, we're now contemplating 15, 20 years ahead of us on a single salary, and with plans for our family that really are much more about what we can give to society than about building our nest egg and just focusing on both of us going back to work and building money. So I think that any homeschooling family you meet is on a budget. And that's something that, you know, I think sometimes people don't really quite understand exactly what that means, but it's tight, you know, it's very tight. You pay for everything. You don't have any government support whatsoever. And you're making decisions that were never maybe for families like us. I know Astrid the same, took her kids out of school at one point. I think, well, you can confirm that, Astrid, but I think that you did, didn't you? Your children initially went to school. And so this was never in our plans. And so financially for us, we, in order to work out what was for us quite a big mortgage, now knowing that I'm not going to be contributing my quite comfortable teaching salary towards that anymore, you know, my kids wear hand-me-down clothes. My husband and I, we have holes in our clothes. We are very tight in the supermarket. Our supermarket budget, I did a load of blog posts about this actually, about how you can, you know, feed a family of 5 for £50 a week. No one thought it could be done, but I was like, I did this for about a year. And now we sometimes spend a little bit more than that if we were seeing friends or whatever, but honestly, you can feed a family of 5 for £50 a week. And I think that there is a thriftiness to homeschooling that is innate, because often it goes hand in hand with caring more about the environment. I don't need to see adverts on TV telling me to not throw out my old clothes. We know that. We use them as rags, or we like crop them, and I'm like, look, now it's a skirt. And I think that this is something that you don't do when you're in mainstream for lots of reasons. One of the reasons is your kids will get picked on, you know? When my kids were at school, even though I don't care for these values at all, but I don't want my kid to be picked on because they're the one that's got a hole in their leggings, or the one that's not got a branded t-shirt. When you start homeschooling, you wash your hands of all of that stuff. You do what's right for your family, and your kids, I think, have a stronger sense of who they are and of what their values are, that they understand that stuff doesn't matter.
And one of the other things that I've heard asked a lot about homeschooling is about social mixing and about children mixing with their peers. So Astrid, do you find that you have are you able to let your kids interact with other children?
This is actually something that we deal with a lot as a traveling family too. Like, this is what we're very mindful of, because we travel, well, when we were traveling, because we were traveling full time, and we would go to other places where sometimes it's a different culture than us. So it's a little harder for our kids to meet other children their age. We did spend a lot of time as a family unit, but once we started connecting with other traveling families, then we were a lot more mindful about meeting up with them in different places. And sometimes we would join pop-up communities that would happen in different places around the world, where the kids could interact with other kids their age. And often it would be from families from different other countries too. So they were also exposed to more of an international type of feel. So I think as a homeschooling family, I think you have to make more of an effort for the kids to interact with other children their age and socialize, but they're also socializing with children and adults of different ages. So in a traditional school, your kids get used to interacting with their peers, but adults are always seen as like an authority figure, or somebody that, you know, you follow the directions. They're the ones that are telling you what to do. But now, since we've been homeschooling, I found that our kids are a lot more comfortable with being around adults and talking to adults as more of like on their level, as opposed to, yes, you're the one that's telling me what to do. And so I think that the socialization happens not on like the same level, but just across the different age groups. And that really helps them to be more interactive with a wider variety of people, as opposed to just their peers.
Yeah, so well, that leads on to my next question, which is about diversity, and how do you manage to make sure that your children come into contact with people from other backgrounds, different races and religions and so on?
I know that the people that I've met through homeschooling, and they're talking about diversity, there is a big Christian, both white and Black Christian community in the UK that homeschools, and there's also a big Muslim community that homeschools. And I haven't met anyone who is not open, friendly, open for their children to play with everyone, talks about religion openly, and has a kind of yeah, a kind of a mindset and a spirit that is for engaging with people and not for polarizing their children. So, for example, a Muslim mum I spoke to before lockdown was telling me that the reason she doesn't want her children in school is because she doesn't want them radicalized, because people who aren't aware of how secondary schools and maybe even primary schools work, you know, in the UK, you have to have a classroom set aside for prayer time. And so that can become a place that is hijacked by children who aren't using it as a prayer room, and who are essentially bullying other children into beliefs that their families don't have. And this mother was speaking to me and saying she homeschools because she doesn't want her son to die and to be radicalized. And so I think that we have to be careful about what we think school is as a place that naturally, you know, diversity naturally, you know, you won't be radicalized in school. That's not actually true. And let's look at what's happening in France, you know, the idea of making her.
So you mentioned that before about the homeschooling community there. It's not something I know about.
So Emmanuel Macron at the beginning of September said that he wants to make homeschooling illegal in France.
Oh.
Yeah. And this is a big deal for us. You know, we're bilingual, half French family. And we were like, God, you know, we should, you know, maybe think about moving to France or maybe traveling around France. Obviously not, if this goes through. So his kind of, his take on this is that it's to do with radicalization and extremism in France. And that, you know, homeschooling is just a cover for radicalization. We have to be really careful about just assuming a kind of white Western authority over what is right and what is wrong and how to see the world. Of course, you know, our family, for example, we're non-religious, and we have a kind of a secular, democratic view of the world that is taken from our perspective. But the thing is, people come from all different cultural backgrounds, and I think that just because we have one kind of dominant viewpoint that we consider to be the right viewpoint doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing the right thing. I think that, again, homeschooling has kind of taught me that you know, all cultures and all families have a lot to bring. And I think that we have a real fear of difference. We have a real fear of cultures that don't match our way of seeing things, which are, you know, within our kind of, the buzzword now, isn't it, is weird, you know, Western, educated, industrial, democratic. I'm sure I've missed one out there, but anyway, our weird societies. You know, we have this kind of we have this rich democratic societies. We have this kind of or, you know, this monopoly on how things should be done. And I think we must be careful. We must be careful in this assumption that, you know, a family who have strong religious views, strong you know, strong views that perhaps they don't want their children mixing in the mainstream. Is that a bad thing? You know, why does that have to be a bad thing? You need to get to know the family, really. In the UK, it is true that you know, that there is no, at the moment, legal obligation to register your children. There's no, there is no register of homeschooled children. There's no sense of how we monitor children. There's no, there are no inspections, anything like that. Anyone can homeschool their children, and can even do it in an off the register way. And I completely understand your concerns, and I think that if this review goes through and if the best outcome happens, because, you know, Amanda Spielman has spoken positively about this being a register that protects vulnerable children and that simply ensures that children are receiving an education that is in line with, you know, whatever their family philosophy is, and that they are, you know, not at risk, and that with this better recognition and better form of registering home educating families, that there may be some kind of financial support as well for exam registrations. They're very expensive, and resources, and I think that would be great. I obviously have concerns that it may go beyond that, which would turn homeschooling into something that it isn't. But if it is that, I think a lot of home educators would agree with that.
But maybe regulating would be interesting. Martin said something in the chat about Finland, and that they have some kind of right to learn. Martin, do you want to say something about that?
Good. I don't know much about it. It's just an inquiry question. Other participants may know more than I do, but I think there are checks in Finland on home educating families in a supportive way. And again, they have such a wonderful wonderful school system anyway, that I'm sure not that many people are home learning there.
Finland seems to have done, and they're on my list of education systems to really spend more time looking at. But they've seemed to remove a lot of the coercion within their system, which has made diverse experiences more appealing. And so I think that's really compelling what they're trying to do. And from what I understand, Finland everyone participates in public schooling, but the public schooling looks so different that it's a very much more positive place to be than what a lot of us experience in our cultures. So I think that's worth looking into.
It kind of brings me on to what we measure as success and what we think successful education looks like. And at the moment in England, certainly, and in the UK, we look at exams, and exams are a marker of success. And I know certainly this year that there weren't any exams because of the pandemic. And it's going to be very hard for any private candidates who will lose out because they don't have any sort of estimated grades that they can take forward. So what do you think about exams and measuring the success in that way? Anna, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I do, but I think maybe also Astrid has children who are coming closer to that sort of exam age. So I'd definitely like to know whether this resonates with you, Astrid. I think really homeschooling in terms of taking exams, you can, it's just open to do it the way you want to do it. I have heard anecdotally of many people going on, including the lovely Kieran from our book, who have gone on to higher education with really no qualifications, just with kind of, a good, letter and finding the right way in and meeting the right people. And after all, in the world of work, that is actually how the world of work kind of works. I think we really need to work on this grades culture, because it really, having worked for 3 years as an examiner, it really isn't a measure of anything. I mean, that would be a whole other conversation, but I think that, children are all homogenized through and given these grades, which mean almost nothing. You have to then, on top of that, distinguish yourself with a statement, and then with this, and then with that, and then you must go to university, and after university you need to do a master's, and then blah, blah, blah. And we all end up just this mushroom education effect that all just is rather meaningless, time-wasting, expensive stuff that actually, number one, it's a shame because it's wasteful, but also it stops children living their lives. I think that we stop children, teenagers really, from living their lives right at the point when many of them are ready to. I come from a family where all of my older brothers, none of my older brothers went to school past the age of sort of 13, 14, and they just dropped out of school and worked on their own businesses. And, they were all working and mostly settled down and married before they were 20. And that was right for them. I think that we have this culture where we kind of keep kids locked into this kind of, this education train of, then getting in debt and then and at the end of it, there's no job for them. You are too qualified to stack a shelf in a shop. You can't, it's ridiculous. It's just, there's just room for everyone in this world. And some children are academic and should be going to university. Some children are ready to live their life at 15 and we should let them, I really think that we hold children back with this constant grades culture. But I don't know, Astrid, do you agree? Your kids are a couple of years older than mine and Philip's.
Yeah, actually, I have a stepson who's in his 20s now, and he did traditional school from, primary onto secondary, and he really struggled, kind of like Philip, in just being motivated to learn. And we saw that, and at the time we felt like we weren't empowered enough to really give him any other option, because both of us weren't aware of how to make homeschooling work for us. And so we just said, you're just going to have to stick through this, just graduate high school and you'll be fine. Then you don't have to work or worry about that. But really, I felt like we did a disservice to him because we just pushed for this when there could have been another option for him. And so with our kids now, with our younger kids, our home state, we are from Washington, so we follow like the Washington state in the US, the Washington state homeschooling laws. And so one of the requirements is that the kids will either do a annual standardized test, or they can do an annual assessment. So we chose to do an assessment with a teacher that we have a arrangement with. And that allows them to still stay on top of the learning standards of the state, but they don't feel that pressure of having to perform to a test or having to do well and study, and just learning for the test versus learning for the sake of learning and enriching their mind. So really homeschooling with our kids has opened up different ways, like a broader sense of learning than just being in school and sitting there for 6 hours a day and sort of passing the time, you know? So I think that it's just another option for families, and really helps us to shift our mindset from like a test-based type of learning to more of a holistic thing.
I'll add on to that. What's the only assessment that is really important to our family is our relationship with our children. And we both me and my wife and I saw in our own lives that school became a wedge between us and our parents, and we just wouldn't have it. And so a lot of people in the unschooling community, and I'm definitely one of those people, would be bold enough to say, I really have no interest in how they perform on tests. I want to get along well with my kids because in some ways, I think of myself as an advice salesman. So I give my kids a lot of advice over the years, and especially when they're older. And if I damage that relationship, they're going to stop buying that advice from me, and they're going to start buying it from someone else. And I can't control who that next person is. And so the better I keep that relationship, the more that they're going to come back to me. And my oldest might say, well, should I go to college? And we'll look at it together, instead of me saying, you have to go to college. And then he starts resenting me and damages the relationship. So that's what I have to say about it.
I want to add too, really, we're as homeschoolers, we're not teaching our kids like certain subjects, but I feel like we're preparing our kids to be adults in society. I mean, that should be the ultimate goal, is you want your kids to be able to know how to pay your bills, how to balance a checkbook, how to cook dinner, you know. And sometimes like my generation of adults, like when we graduated from school, we didn't have those skills. We had to sort of learn it ourselves. So I feel like with homeschooling, you're incorporating those life skills into the learning too. And so that really helps them to become better adults.
Well, that sounds like a fabulous thing to think about, having better adults in the long term. So I want to say thank you very much to Anna and Astrid and Philip and the rest of you for coming. And of course, celebrating the book, all still with my post-its in. And the book's on the Hawthorn website with a special offer until the 9th of November. So you can pick up a coffee if you haven't got one already. And thank you very much to the audience that came and joined us. And Vic says, I love the book and I'm homeschooling for the first time and the book's really helpful. Thanks, Vic.